being Scott, I just wanted to welcome you all and thank you for coming, and thanks to those professors who encourage their students to come. I'm the director of the Mansfield Ethics and Public Affairs Program, formerly the Center for Ethics. So again, thank you, Miguel, for coming in. Siobhan Lozada will introduce Miguel.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you all for coming out tonight. We have a very special guest with us tonight. He's coming from the University of California at Berkeley, Dr. Miguel Altieri, who is not only an agroecologist but also an activist. And before we get started tonight on the talk, Who Will Feed the Planet in Crisis, I just wanted to give you a little bit more background to begin. Dr. Altieri has served as a scientific advisor to the Latin American Consortium on Agroecology and Development, an NGO network promoting agroecology as a strategy for small farm sustainable development in the region. He also served for 4 years as the general coordinator for the United Nations Development Program's Sustainable Agricultural Network and Extension Programs, which aims at capacity building among NGOs and the scaling up of successful local sustainable agricultural initiatives in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Currently, Dr. Altieri is the advisor to the Globally Ingenious Agricultural Heritage Systems, a program devoted to identifying and dynamically conserving traditional farming systems in the developing world. He is also the president of the Latin American Scientific Society of Agroecology and author of over 200 publications. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Miguel Altieri.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad and thankful for the invitation, and I'm glad that it worked out that I could come out here. Although I have been in Montana before, if I recall, maybe 1984, something like that, with that group Aero in Bozeman, many years ago. And then I also came by to a meeting with a rich family called the Mott family. They have a ranch near the park, the Yellowstone. It's a very progressive foundation, actually located in California, and they fund a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about. So what I'm going to be talking about is trying to answer this question: who will feed us in a planet in crisis? And I don't know. Doesn't work. Maybe. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it's not working, but. Huh? Oh, okay. We'll do the keyboard. So basically, we have in the world about 1,500 million hectares of arable land. That's all there is. And there's several demands over this land. One of them is obviously that it has to feed a growing population with healthy and accessible food. The other one is that it has to conserve biodiversity and reduce the environmental impact. In other words, this agriculture has to be nature friendly. It has to, some people are saying, well, it has to produce also fuels, agrofuels, biomass that we need, as alternative energy. There is also the need that this agriculture reduces emissions, because about 1/3 of the greenhouse gases are emitted by industrial agriculture. And it has to adapt to climate change. It has to be a resilient agriculture. And at the same time, it has to be profitable to farmers, all farmers, big, small, medium farmers throughout the world. Well, sometimes when I give these talks, Monsanto gets in and does something to the system. This one? No? Right. Okay. So these demands, however, are happening in the context of three major crises that are affecting the planet. So there are demands that are difficult to meet, and they are contradictory in many times. And on top of that, they're happening in the midst of three crises: the economic financial crisis, that is the crisis of capitalism, energy crisis, and an ecological crisis of which climate change is only one manifestation. We have also extinction, we have acidification of oceans, we have soil degradation, we have many, many ecological manifestations of the ecological crisis, not just climate change. And so, we're facing major challenges. Now, there's a model of agriculture, which is the industrial model, which has dominated. It dominates about 90% of the major crops that are grown in the world, like cotton, corn, soybean, rice, etc., grown in the industrial model of agriculture and the monocultures with high inputs. But what we're seeing is that there's a decline in the productivity of this agriculture. I'm just giving you an example of the yield average of the industrial agriculture in India, which is one of the countries that benefited supposedly from the Green Revolution, and we're seeing that it's declining steadily through the year. There's also obviously a major costs and externalities associated with industrial agriculture, which we don't account for in our economic analysis. It goes all the way from disappearing wetlands, soil losses, air emissions, water contamination, biodiversity loss, human health. So therefore, we're not really paying the true cost of food, because the true cost of food has to account for the externalities. In general, what happens with the externalities is that we pay the externalities, the public, and the ones that are causing the pollution do not pay for it. The emissions of industrial agriculture, as I said, they're huge. Some statistics vary, but it's around 20 to 30% of the global emissions of the major gases like CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide are coming from the different activities of industrial agriculture. And on top of that, we can see that agriculture is perhaps one of the big contributors to CO2. As you can see in this map, all the red slots are the carbon residence times in years. So the more red it is, the less the carbon is in the soil. And you can see that is an amazing coincidence between the red spots, California, Midwest, Florida, where intensive agriculture, industrial agriculture is occurring. That's when carbon lasts the least in these ecosystems. And obviously, we see that this agriculture has been fueled by petroleum, and it's very clear how the farm expenses, the cost of production are tied to petroleum. As fertilizer prices go up, because petroleum goes up, you will have also, this is farm expenses on machinery and fuel. Obviously, there's a direct correlation between the dependency on fuel and the cost of production. And that explains why about 119 farmers go out of business in this country every day. Because the idea is that everybody has to raise productivity. How do you raise productivity? You adopt the technology, the fertilizers, and so on. Then everybody produces more. Then what happens? The cost of the production of the produce that you get paid for is very minimal. And therefore, you don't earn money. Your net income doesn't increase. And therefore, you get in debt. And we have more prisoners than farmers in this country, and many of the prisoners are farmers that could not pay the debt to the banks. And obviously, the other thing that the whole thing is being reflected through what is called the food prices. All the riots that have happened, and even the Arab Spring that we talk about, that is a movement for democracy, actually started. It was fueled by food prices. And there's a very interesting paper that is showing that actually there is a certain threshold above which food riots start happening when the food price goes up. And it is expected that by 2013 there are going to be many food riots in the world, including the United States, if the trends continue the way they are, which is about an increase in food price globally, on average, 36%. And what is expected that, given the situation that we're facing today, is these prices are going to go above that level, and food riots, therefore, are going to multiply throughout the world. So there is an interesting correlation between food production, food access, and social unrest. So what are the challenges that we're facing for the next decades? We're going to have, definitely, there's different estimates. People say that we need to increase food production. It is a necessary, but not a sufficient condition to end hunger. I want to make clear that hunger doesn't have anything to do with food production or lack of food. It's a problem of access, it's a problem of equity, it's a problem of poverty, etc. But still, we need, as a condition, necessary condition to increase food production. But we're going to have the same arable land base, but much of that arable land base is going to be not being devoted. 1,500 million hectares are going to be devoted for food production. What the corporations are interested in land as biomass producers. So plastics, biofuel, pharmaceuticals, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. Whatever pays best, that's what the land is going to be devoted to, with less petroleum, or more expensive petroleum for sure, less water, less nitrogen, with this scenario of climate change, social unrest, and financial crisis. And our hypothesis is that the challenge cannot be met with the existing industrial agriculture model and its biological, biotechnological derivations, and that what we need is a new paradigm. And this is not something that a bunch of radical agroecologists are saying. It has been also supported by recent reports like ISDD, by the UN report of the rapporteur on the right to food. Many people are saying that we need a new paradigm. Business as usual cannot continue. And the other thing that is obvious is that we cannot solve the problem with the same mentality that I created. And if we recognize that these crises that we're facing are the product of the capitalist model, then we cannot use capitalism to solve the problem that was created. And unfortunately, there's a lot of green capitalism solutions that are emerging, which are not going to the root cause of the problem. They're just kind of solving the symptoms of the crisis. So, despite this, the major effort, the major funding going on in the private sector and in the public sector, in the universities, with the tremendous influence that corporations are having in the universities. An example, my university, University of California at Berkeley, $500 million from British Petroleum for transgenic biofuels, okay? And so the whole idea is like, well, we can tweak a little bit the system and, come up with smart genes, climate smart genes that are going to solve the problem, or whatever genes you can think of. And this is what has explained the emergence of biotechnology. There are about 180 million hectares worldwide of transgenic crops today, of which 65% of that is transgenic soybean, resistant to Roundup. And it's growing in the developing world also, but mostly it's in the United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, now China is a new actor, and so on. But the solution is the same. It's like the magic bullet. One pest. Before it was one pest, one pesticide. Now it's one pest, one gene. Is a drought? Well, one gene for that. And that has been the magic bullet approach to agriculture that, that characterizes in conventional agriculture. We see the problems that we're facing with that. We're going to be facing the same problems with this. But nevertheless, these people keep arguing that we can solve the problems of hunger with biotechnology, and one of the major supporters of this is Gates Foundation. Bill Gates, he funds this stuff in Africa. And the first thing is that of these 180 million hectares of transgenic crops, there is not 1 hectare that is feeding the 1 billion hungry people in the world. Not 1 hectare. Why? Because we're talking about 4 crops: corn, soybean, cotton, and canola. The corn, 70% of it goes to feed animals, cattle, and the rest goes for biofuels, for ethanol. The same thing with soybean. And well, you could argue, but meat is food. Yeah, but the poor don't eat meat. We're talking about people that make $1 less a day. So, and then cotton, nobody eats it. And then canola, I guess the Canadians put it in salad. So, it could be argued right from the spot that none of this stuff is benefiting the poor. You don't need to go beyond that. The evidence is there. The Chinese already bought all the soybean of Argentina until Brazil and Argentina until the year 2018 for their cattle, for their feed. But then, they said, well, no, but we can still make a contribution. Look at golden rice. Golden rice, we are going to make a rice that is going to produce beta-carotene, very important for the poor in Asia that have deficiency of vitamin A and they have these problems with blindness and so on. So therefore we're going to solve the problem with this. Well, the first thing is that the system that these people use, the traditional systems, if you go to still areas of Asia, in Indonesia, in Philippines, in China, you will find traditional rice systems in which rice is just one component of the system. They have rice, they have fish, they have ducks, they have eels, they have fruit trees, they have other crops during the dry season and so on. And if you have this system, you're not going to have any kind of deficiency, not only vitamin A, nothing, no deficiencies. And these systems are pretty sustainable, actually. For example, in the rice fish systems, if you go to South China, where there's thousands of hectares with this management, this system not only produce rice, they produce fish, they produce ducks. People are eating, they're self-sustained in terms of food. But the fish also play a major role in the stability of the systems. For example, this fish is not any fish. It's a fish that has to be co-adapted, co-evolved with the rice, and plays a major role in moving the water, which actually has an effect in the aeration and air circulation and in the growth of the plants. It has been already measured by the Chinese, but also the other thing is that they push the plant, and then the bugs fall down and they eat them. So when you have rice and fish, you don't have outbreaks of leafhoppers, which is a major pest that has been controlled with tons and tons of pesticides in systems when the only thing you needed to do was introduce rice. So when the Green Revolution came, those systems were simplified to these monocultures. And if you condemn people to eat rice and only rice, you're going to have deficiencies of vitamin A, but deficiencies of many other things. And that's what is happening. And with the Green Revolution comes the technology, which eliminates what we call weeds in Western science, agronomic science. Weed is a plant out of space, out of place. That's what they taught me in agronomy, remember? Any plant that is not a crop is a weed. Get it out, use an herbicide. Well, in peasant agriculture throughout the world, they don't have the concept of weed. In Mexico, they call them elites. They don't have the word malezas, which would be in Spanish, weeds. Huh? And the same thing in China, and in Southeast Asia. These plants that you see here, these farmers use them to feed cattle, medicinal purposes, and to feed themselves. And these plants were all eliminated with the Green Revolution technology. And more so now with the Roundup Ready type of crops, which nothing grows but the crop that is selected to resistance. And why is that important? Because if you look at the content of beta-carotene of the golden rice is 1.6 micrograms per gram of fresh weight, when one leaf of one of those weeds would have about 400. So you need to eat 3 kilos of that rice to actually get what you would get from 2 or 3 leaves of these veggies that these farmers were sponsoring their systems, in their traditional systems. And on top of that, golden rice is a rice that is golden, it's orange. And people have eaten white rice for thousands and thousands of years. So there's a connection there. Try to bring, I don't know, blue French fries to McDonald's, what would happen? Nobody would eat them. There's cultural aspects to food consumption that these people did not take into consideration. So this approach is progressing, and one example is soybean in Argentina. This is data till 2002, but things have gotten worse. And when you look at the statistics, the people from the government and Monsanto say, look at the area is increasing, the adoption is increasing, the production is increasing. Farmers love this stuff. Are you going to tell me that you're going to deny this technology to the farmers? Look at this, look at the area is expanding. The farmers love this stuff. That's all they want. When you look at this, obviously it's not that the case. But how does transgenic soybean get into the landscapes and also in the United States? Through what they call no-till agriculture. And the no-till agriculture, they sell it as a very sustainable agriculture because it conserves the soil. But that's the only thing it conserves. It doesn't conserve farmers. It doesn't conserve soil biodiversity because the use of Roundup is very high. So you have here corn or wheat. Then you come with Roundup. You spray the stuff many times you want by planes, by tractors, and then the soybean basically will grow because it's resistant. So you condemn farmers to rice and then to soybean, and you condemn monoculture, and then you condemn them to Roundup. And then what happens is that, okay, you can see that the farmers, that you get no-till. Then if you go into no-till, you have to use the Roundup Ready soybean. If you use the Roundup Ready soybean, you have to use the glyphosate. And then you have to have the machinery to harvest this stuff. And it turns out that in a period of 5 years in Argentina, the area went up, yeah, no discussion. The number of farmers went down. 60,000 farmers went out of business in Argentina in 5 years. Why? Because you created an economics of scale. In order for you to have the tractor, you have to have minimum 500 hectares. It happened with the tomato harvest in California. If you didn't have more than 140 acres, you were out of business. And actually there was a suit against the University of California because they did not calculate the social impact of the technology. And then you condemn these farmers to Roundup. Here you can see the use of Roundup going up and up and up and up. And then what Monsanto says in the propaganda is that, oh, but our herbicide is not toxic, and we're getting rid of these very toxic guys. 2,4-D, atrazine, atrazine causes all kinds of problems with amphibians. Look at how good we are. We're putting this non-toxic herbicide, facilities with management, and we're getting rid of these toxic chemicals. That's why they say that transgenics reduce chemical use, not Roundup, other chemicals. But when you start spraying this stuff, this is what happens. These are super weeds. This is a farmer in southern Brazil. Super weeds are weeds that were sprayed and sprayed and sprayed, and we know, from entomological times that insects and weeds and diseases acquire resistance. So that's what's happening. And in order to get rid of this stuff, which is resistant to Roundup, you have to use now 2,4-D. You fall in what is called the pesticide treadmill. But the worst weed is not a weed, it's actually soybean. So what is the definition of weed? A plant out of place. So since they use the harvesters, thousands of the seeds fall down and they show up out of the row. So this soybean, which is transgenic, is a weed. It needs to be eliminated, but you cannot eliminate it with Roundup. So you have to use 2,4-D again. And this is actually the worst super weed is the volunteer soybean that comes from the year before. And this is what is in ZAP. This is the inheritance of the transgenic agriculture. Basically, a lot of erosion. And once they abandon this, they move and they go to Paraguay. They call them the Brasileiros, the Brazilian soybean growers now go to Paraguay, go to Bolivia. And, if this was destroyed, well, let's move. That's what they're doing. But the only ones that resist the advance of this are the peasants. This is a picture in Paraguay that is very important because all this area surrounding this group here of 50 families is transgenic soybean. And these people gave up a fight, they put a fight and they resisted to sell land. They would not sell their land. They would not move from there. Because many times they force them to sell land. They surround them, they dry their watersheds, all kinds of things. And they are the only ones producing food in a radius of 350 kilometers. So they're making great money because all the people that work, the workers of this companies, are the ones that are consuming the food. So can you imagine if they didn't exist, this whole thing would be a food desert. And that's what's happening in many, many of the landscapes in where soybean monoculture is expanding. But that's not it. And that's not all. The second is agri-fuels. So you have grain, the grain merchant, the automobile companies, petroleum companies, genetic engineering companies, many of them funding universities, and they're promoting this. So for the first time, there's a strong alliance of corporations that are going to be deciding what's going to be grown, what is going to be the future of the landscapes of the world. And why the emphasis so much on biofuels is, well, it's very simple. The OECD countries, the United States involved, Europe, etc., consume 48.5% of the energy. But we don't want an alternative energy that is going to cause too much trouble that we need to change the whole system. We just want to change the fuel. That's easier, because if we're going to use solar or electric or whatever, you need to change a lot of things, much more complicated. So what about changing the fuel? Okay, but where's the land to grow that fuel? Well, this is the map of what we call the new agricultural frontier, Africa and South America. That's where the land is. There's no other land available to do this. Because Uh, if we were going to devote all the area under corn to ethanol in the United States, it would satisfy only 12% of the demand. So there's not enough land in this country to satisfy the needs. We have to find the land somewhere else. And every time we fill up a tank with 25 gallons of ethanol, we are consuming the corn that would feed one person per year. Okay? So where is the land? The land, as I said, is in Africa and in South America, but how we can acquire the land is through what is called the land grabs. There's a lot of land banking going on, a lot of speculation where corporations, governments are getting involved in this. And this you can see, for example, the amount of land that was under the investments in land before it was public in 4 countries in Africa. It was half and half, private and public. Today it's all private. Okay? So there are leases of land that are being done in countries such as different countries in Africa. And those countries have the worst indexes of food insecurity. But on top of that, many of these land grabbing processes just leave the land fallow. They are not even producing food, they're not even producing fuel. They just leave it fallow for speculation. But at the same time, they are claiming for carbon credits. So they're making money. And this carbon credit facility, I don't know what the name it is, it's an international organization, is paying these people for the ecological service that they're providing for humankind. So here we can see expansion of the energy crops, sugarcane, soybean, maize, palm oil. Here we see what's happening with the food crops that feed us, potatoes, barley, rice, and so on. They're declining or becoming stagnant. And obviously, this expansion has all kinds of ecological threats that I don't have time to go to, but just to give you an example, in Chocó, Colombia, which is a tropical area from Panama to Ecuador, which is a lot of it controlled under the paramilitaries, which is the right-wing guerrillas funded by the aristocracy of Colombia. They're shaving that whole area for biofuel. So this is the advancement of the monocultures. There's the forest, and those are the monocultures of palm oil that are being introduced, displacing native people, impacts on biodiversity that nobody's measuring because the access to that area is very, very complicated, etc., etc. So that's the bad news. What are the good news? The good news is that we have agroecology, and that provides a paradigm for the new agriculture that we need for the future. But that agriculture has to have very important features. One of them, it has to be decoupled from fossil fuel dependence. It has to be an agriculture that is environmentally friendly, that it has to be resilient to climate change, that it has to be multifunctional. That is, that agriculture not only provides food, but it provides many, many services, ecological services, cultural services, social services, and it has to be providing the foundation for local food systems. Okay, and those are the requirements. And we have different models that we could use. These are the possibilities. This is the level of agroecosystem diversity, high, low, and then this is the productivity, high, low, and then efficiency. And what we're looking for is an agriculture that is going to be with high productivity, high diversity, high efficiency, with low external inputs, high recycling rates, and a high level of integration of the components. Of animal and crop components interacting in a very complex ecological system. So who is doing this? Who is using this system? The peasants. And the peasants are feeding us, actually. If you look at the report of the ETC, you will find that 50% of the food that we eat today comes from the peasant sector, the small farm sector in the world, including small farms in the United States, in Europe, everywhere. Industrial agriculture only provides 30% of the food that we eat. Most of the food is for most of the production of industrial agriculture is for other purposes. It's not for feeding people. So these people, these peasants, there is about 1.5 billion worldwide, 380 million small farms, and as I said, they produce about between 50 and 70% if you also consider the hunters and gatherers and the mushroom collectors and that stuff. It would be about 70% of the food that we're eating. What has been the contribution of peasants compared to the Green Revolution in terms of biodiversity, agrobiodiversity? They have domesticated more than 40 species of animals. These guys have only domesticated 5. 7,000 and more animal breeds as opposed to less than 500. 1.9 million crop varieties. 1.9 million crop varieties. The Green Revolution was able to only develop 8,000 with all the support of Rockefeller, Ford, Kellogg, and the USAID, and you name it. So the contribution that this peasant had on agrobiodiversity and the linkages with food security have been enormous. We would not be eating today if these people were not there. In Brazil, just to give you an example, they only control 24% of the land, what they call the agricultores familiares, the family farmers. But they are 84% of the farms. But they produce 80% of the cassava, which is a very important root crop, 70% of the beans. They have a major contribution in terms of the food security of that country. Now, what is interesting is that there is a myth. Everybody thinks that modern agriculture is very efficient. When I go to Davis and people say, well, the U.S. agriculture, 2% of the population is involved in farming and we're the basket of the world. We're feeding everybody, we're very productive and so on and so on. But it turns out that small farms are more productive than large farms. There's a report that was written by Peter Rosset that is published in Food First webpage, where it shows that using data from FAO, 40 graphs like this show that country after country, this is farm size, small farm size, this is total output. It's not the yield of just the corn. The corn is the yield of the corn, plus the beans, plus the squash, plus the pigs, plus the fruits, because that's how small farmers operate. The total output is much higher the smaller your farm than when you get to large farms, your total output is minimal. So, first of all, there's a big myth that large farms are more productive than small farms. And the reason why small farms are more productive, and they do it also with a higher energy efficiency, is because these complex systems complement each other in ecological interactions, but they are over-yielding. So, for example, if you compare the yield of corn bean association versus the corn monoculture, what you're going to find, and it's calculated with a value called the total, the land equivalent ratio, the LER, and when the value is higher than 1, that means that your polyculture is over-yielding. So that means 1.5 would mean that you need 1.5 hectares of monoculture to obtain the same productivity that you get in 1 hectare of polyculture, and actually with less inputs. So farmers, peasants, also not only maintain the diversity within their systems, but they also understand that the ecological matrix that surrounds them is important, because that ecological matrix is providing several ecological services to the system. One of them is that they go into the forest and they harvest the litter, and with that litter, they inoculate their compost piles, because they know that that's where the native microbiology is. So that's a major ecological service. But they also, their strategy is that not only they do production of food, but they do, for example, the Yucatecas, for example, they gather, they hunt, they have beekeeping, they have domestic animals, silviculture, fishing, and agriculture and horticulture is only part of their strategy. 40% of the food comes from agriculture and horticulture, the rest comes from interacting with the natural environment. Now, there's one example from Cuba, and I always mention Cuba not because I'm communist, a little bit. It's because it's the only country that today we could say there's a country living in post-oil times. Because in the 1990s, when the Soviet bloc collapsed, they were highly dependent on oil and fertilizers and pesticides from the Soviet Union, and that was turned off. 80% of the import went. So, what are you going to do? You have to reinvent the wheel, do something in order to survive. They went through a major crisis, but then they started bouncing back. And ANAP is an association of the National Association of Small Producers, and this is the time when, in 1999, this is when the special period started. That's how they call it. And you can see the number of farmers that were involved in agroecology, 216. And then they started adopting a method called the campesino-campesino, which is an horizontal exchange between farmers. And then little by little, it went exponentially to 110,000 farmers today that are adopting agroecological methods. So this is just one family to show you an example. And here you can see the yields before the special period and the yields after the special period. The yields increased. I'm sorry. The yields increased after the special period without inputs in all the crops. And what technologies are they using? The things that, the people that are involved in the sustainable agriculture movement know, rotations, animal integration, compost, green manures, nothing out of this world. Perhaps this might be the most sophisticated machinery you'll find in one of those farms, and a lot of soil amendments of different kinds that they fabricate. And this farmer, for example, Fernandito, grows about 12 different vegetable crops. He gets an LER of 1.76, so he obtains 76% more than a monoculture with his system. And when you calculate how much calories, how much energy it produces, how much protein it produces per hectare per year, you can see very clearly that he can feed 21 people with the kilocalories he produces from 1 hectare, 21 people, and 12.5 people with protein from 1 hectare per year, okay? With an energy efficiency ratio of about 11.2. He puts 1 kilocalorie, he obtains 11. Now, these are the family, Casimiro and his family. They have 10 hectares and they have animals in the system. And these guys produce much more protein, and they can feed more people. 34 people with the protein produced in 1 hectare, 11 with the kilocalories, and the energy efficiency ratio is 30. They put 1, and they get 30 out. You know what's the best energy efficiency in the United States? Take a guess. 3. 10 times more efficient. Very important in a time when you don't have oil or when oil is very expensive to have energy efficiency. Very, very, very important. Unless you're subsidized, obviously. So, how do they achieve this? By following the agroecological principles. You see, agroecology is not a bunch of recommendations or techniques as opposed to organic farming that many times fall in that trap of the recommendation, use this magic bullet for this, for that. It's just principles that take technological forms depending on the economic and social and cultural and environmental conditions. The other thing is that these people maintain agrobiodiversity, and it's very important because the germplasm that they use for their agriculture is local and is adapted to the conditions that they have been that they're facing. So there is a very close relationship between the cultural diversity and the biological diversity that these people maintain. If you get rid of the culture, you get rid of the biodiversity, and vice versa. If you want to conserve those potatoes, you need to conserve the traditional cultures and their knowledge base on how to manage these plants and so on. And women are very important here in that part, in the knowledge. So, as you know, Mexico is a center of origin of maize, now being threatened because the Mexican government, under the tremendous influence of CIMIT and Monsanto and other organizations, are going to be releasing transgenic corn in center of origin. But the question is, why would you need corn varieties, even modern varieties in Mexico, when, for example, these are your land races, and you can find land races, and from these land races, thousands of varieties have been derived that can grow from 0 to 3,500 millimeters of water, and from 0 altitude to 3,000 meters above sea level. I'm sure you can find corn varieties here that you could grow here under your water resources. So the question is, why do you want to develop new varieties when they have all the biodiversity that they need? In fact, this is one system that we've been studying in Oaxaca called the maíz de cajete. It's a variety of corn that farmers use because in that area they live under very unpredictable rainfall pattern, and it's getting worse. And they call it cajete because they make a cajete. Cajete is like a little cavity in which then they will plant the seeds kind of deep, and then those seeds will come up without rain. But obviously, in order for you to manage that system, you have to have the knowledge that the farmers have. what's the distance, when you have to plant it, how you're going to have to cover it, and all that. It's all associated with a knowledge base that is not easily replicable. It's not just bring the corn here and we'll plant it and see what happens. And the other way in which these people maintain this diversity is through seed fairs. There's a tremendous amount of exchange where farmers come to an area that the church provides or the municipality provides, and they exchange the seed germplasm, and they exchange ideas. And many times, these farmers, for the first time, are able to see the tremendous agrobiodiversity in the region, because they might know what their neighbors have, but they sometimes don't know what the whole region has, and it's very enriching. And then there are NGOs there that are also doing workshops about why others are interested in their seeds. And they need to be aware of biopiracy and things of that nature. Now, the other thing is that these farms are resilient to climate change. This is the topic that is very important, because there's a lot of studies about mitigation of climate change. There's a lot of studies predicting what's going to happen with climate change and the productivity of agriculture. But nobody's paying attention. How are we going to make it resilient? If the reality is going to be droughts and hurricanes, how are we going to resist them? So these guys hold the truth, a lot of lessons that we can learn from studying this millenary system. This is a site in southern China that was affected by a big drought for 3 years. And not far from there, in the same region, these rice paddies did not get affected by the drought in the Yuan Terrace region. And the reason is, this is a map of the area, is that the traditional agricultural systems that survived were surrounded by forest. And all the area that suffered the drought were areas of industrial monocultures in which all the vegetation was eliminated. And why forests play an important role? They play an important role in maintaining the local hydrological cycles. I mean, you have here a School of Forestry, you probably know better than I, the importance of trees and the importance of the matrix that surrounds your agroecosystems. In the Andes, farmers have also done the same. They have done a lot of faced with the changing temperature and humidity regimes with the mountain. The traditional farmers have classified the mountain, and they developed the different varieties to the different altitudinal gradients. But also, since this is all communally managed, farmers have the same families don't put all theirs in one basket. They don't put all their plots here. They put them in different parts of the mountain, because when the disaster comes, the more plots you have distributed in the mountain, the less damage you will have, the less frequency of disaster. It's a strategy to deal with risk. You go a little bit higher, and you get to the 3,800 meters, and you go to the Cusco region, above that, Puno region, and you'll find the systems that are being revived by farmers themselves, called the water waters. This system existed when the Spanish came, of race field agriculture, and here the water canals play a very important role, not only that they grow fish here and they have mud that they can use as fertilizer and so on, but also that the water absorbs the heat during the day, releases it at night, and you offset frost. Now somebody could say, I can develop a gene, a smart gene that could do that, but the question would be, where are you going to get the fish? Where are you going to get the fertility? The other benefits that come with an integrated system like that. And then there's a big emphasis in modernizing the coffee plantations. Brazil has been one example where they have got rid of the shade, because they know the shade kind of reduces a little bit the yields. But it turns out that the systems are multifunctional. They conserve biodiversity. They have trees that produce fruits and many other things, and wood and so on. But if you wanted to increase yields, you can by getting rid of the shade. But the question would be, what happens when the drought comes? And this is the evapotranspiration in low shade, and this is the evapotranspiration in high shade systems. So the question is, we cannot continue thinking in the paradigm of productivity with the same mentality that we developed it 50 years ago, because the world changed. We're in a different world today, climatically, ecologically speaking, it's a different world. And then, so these systems are more resilient, And when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about resistance to shock and recovery from shock. And there's two evidences that are very important. One was a study of Eddie Paul Jimenez, who was here, when he studied the impact of midge in Central America. And he found that the farmers had monocultures suffered more damage, especially mudslides, than the more diversified farms like this one, where you don't get that effect. And because you have more soil protection, you have agroforestry systems and so on, you don't have mudslides. And actually he measured this and finds that in Honduras, where midge was much more severe, their ecological farms suffer significantly lower losses than the monoculture system. And then the other study comes from Cuba, where in the 2008, there was 3 hurricanes, among them Ike, perhaps the most severe, and the system that survived were these systems. And they measured actually post-event, category 3 were the more diversified farms. This is the monoculture farms. You can see that there's a difference, there's a reduction in damage, but perhaps more importantly is the recovery rate. 60 days after, the productivity of the more complex farms, which were number 3, was much faster than the rest of the farms. So you have a higher recovery rate in the more complex farms. And then in some areas, farmers have, for historical reasons, inherited degraded ecosystems, like in Oaxaca, if you go to the Mixteca. And these farmers have decided to stay here, because what is their future? Go to California and be farm workers, or go to Mexico City and be, whatever. So they decided to stay. They actually received the Golden Man Prize 2 years ago. And the first thing they do is they reforest the top of the mountains, because they say that the top of the mountain is the sponge. And they use Pinus oaxacensis, which is a local variety of pine, local species of pine. And then they do a lot of soil terracing in order to conserve soil, recover soil, and then water harvesting by building these ditches that harvest water. And then with that water, they can grow in the dry season limited amounts of land devoted to crops such as amaranthus and corn and bean associations. So, this is a farm in Colombia that was totally deforested, a mountain. And then an NGO called CIPAB in the Cauca Valley of Colombia, together with the peasants, started rearranging this farm, this system, and having silvopastoral and agroforestry models that are now productive. So if you want to get a class of restoration ecology, go and learn from these farmers, because they have a lot to teach us about restoring landscapes. And the other thing is that they're constant agroecological experimenters. They're experimenting constantly. They're innovators. So one example, in southern Brazil, there's a big controversy in this country about whether you can do no-till organic, because no-till agriculture is basically dependent on Roundup. Well, these guys have been doing it for 30 years, organic, no-till. What they do is they use what they call a cocktail of cover crops. It's a mixture of 9 varieties, 9 species, but there's always 3 that are present, that are very important. Vicia, vetch, rye, and foreign radish. And they're always present in this. And what they do, they come with a thing called the roll of faca, which is a roller. It can be just a tree trunk that just smothers the thing, and then they plant their crops, corn and beans, in between the stubble. No weeds come up, and the beans and the corn come up. So, why is that happening? Well, it's well known, and we did 3 years of research on this, where we found that actually, when this material decomposes, they start releasing allelochemical compounds, secondary chemical compounds that inhibit weed germination. In the first 2 centimeters, they form this toxic layer. That's where you have 99% of the seed bank of weeds. But the farmers, through experimentation, they found that if they would plant deeper, their corn and beans would come up free of the toxicity. When we explained to them after 4 years of research with 4 master theses and all that, and we explained to them, said, oh, we didn't know that, but we've been doing it for 25 years. It was like, okay, well, what was my contribution? Kind of a so what, type of question, kind of humbling. This is another very interesting innovation. If you go to Costa Rica, In some areas, it's impossible to grow tomatoes. And that's what the Ministry of Agriculture will tell you, that's what Kathy will tell you, and impossible unless you spray the hell out of the tomatoes because there's whiteflies, and the whiteflies transmit a virus, which is very serious. Well, you go to Costa Rica in some areas and you find farmers growing tomatoes. And you say, well, where's the tomato? That's cilantro. Yeah, they're hiding in between the tomato. So what happens is that this camouflage, this odor, visual camouflage repels the whiteflies. They become non-apparent, so that the whiteflies cannot find them. And then when they start growing, they harvest some of the cilantro, they sell it because the plant it's not very susceptible later on. So at the beginning of when you transplant the first 30 days, this works. They didn't study in any university, they didn't get a PhD, but this is a fantastic PhD thesis. And how this information spreads is through the campesino movement. And this is, Eric Jimenez has a very fantastic book called Campesino. You can find it in foodfirst.org. And it's a horizontal way of transferring knowledge. And our role as scientists is basically facilitating the process. We don't have much to do here. Extension would go broke in areas where this is being practiced in Central America and Mesoamerica. This is an example in the Guaruguarus of Puno, where other farmers from other regions came and they're exchanging between them. They have like an outside class, they have congresses, they have cross visits, they have all kinds of events. They have their own congresses. And they share this information. So what is happening then, I'm sorry this is in Spanish, is that we have the agricultural empires, the food empires, the corporations that control what the producers are gonna produce, what they're gonna produce, how they're gonna produce it, and the consumers, where we're gonna eat, how much we're gonna pay for the price. So Walmart, all these guys are here, and then Monsanto, and all those guys are there. And what we are needing to do is to create a bypass, which is the peasant markets, or the peasant-based markets. And there's many interpretations, not just not just the farmers market, or the CSAs. That's one model. The other model are, for example, this is in southern Brazil, where farmers bring to the fairs their produce, but since the PT is the mayor of the city is from PT, the Workers' Party, supports the farmers by bringing their produce, puts a truck from the municipality to bring the produce, which lowers the cost tremendously, gives them for free the rent of the place, with the condition that they have to sell cheaper than conventional. So this is organic produce, cheaper than conventional. I don't think that anywhere in the world organic is cheaper than conventional. And they have a loyalty of the consumers, and this is one particular way. The other is the what we call the institutional markets, which actually you also are doing here. This is one city in southern Brazil where the mayor is an organic farmer that got elected. And the first thing he did, he put a big sign saying, here we produce food without agrotoxics. Okay? And what they have done here is they have created associations of farmers that all the food that they produce has to go to the schools, hospitals, and other type of institutions, but they cannot just give tomatoes and lettuce. They have to give them yogurt and cheese and chicken and whatever. And so they get funding also for agro-industries where they can process this material. And this particular community that I know, Santa Rosa de Lima, they have to produce 44,000 per week of lunches, of the materials that are going to make the lunch. So here's, each one of these things is a lunch that is going to last 2 or 3 days for children or for people in the hospital, where you have eggs, you have ham, you have cheese, you have this, you have that. Okay? And actually the government, the local government now saves 10% in the institutional food money than before, when they were buying from these big dealers that were bringing pizzas and things of that nature. Not that the pizzas are bad, the ones that we just had not too long ago. At least the guy buys locally all day. Huh? So there's a very interesting study that was done by Bagley in Michigan that shows what would be the potential of enhancing productivity in different crops with agroecological methods. And the conclusion is that the area where you have the potential is the south, not the north. And they stop there, but my analysis of this situation is the following. I think the potential breadbasket of the world is in the South for three fundamental reasons. One, they have the germplasm. I mean, if you want local varieties, the only place you go is where the small farmers are, where they have all that variability that we need. The second, they have the knowledge, the millenary knowledge associated with their management systems. And the third is that they have social movements that are highly organized in order to scale up these approaches. But what about the North? Can we bring the agroecological approach to the large scale? And, you know, organic farming, this is an organic farm in California. They're mostly monocultures that follow input substitution. They just change the package. No chemicals? Well, we can use this other stuff. We can spray the hell out of them. We can put green applications of this mineral and that soap and this and that and that. Actually, cost of production can be very high. You can upset the ecology of the system very easily. Use botanical insecticides that wipe out the pests, but they also wipe out the beneficial insects. I mean, the same problems can be associated with this model. On top of that, it's becoming corporate because 3% of the largest farmers control 68% of all the gross sales of organic in California. And there's no limitation of size in the certification. The treatment of farm work is not better in conventional farming than in organic farming in California on average. So there's a lot of problems associated with this model. But can you, in addition to taking care of the social problems that I was saying, can we make this agriculture based on ecological principles? Definitely yes. There are models where we, instead of spraying these chemicals to kill insects, the aphids in lettuce, we can grow, for example, these flowers that attract syrphid flies that are predators of the aphids. You know that you have to do 100 meters away another one because these guys only move 50 meters. And you know, we can do research and we can actually diversify the systems and following the logic of production that these farmers need. In vineyards, in California, we're putting flowers in the middle or under the drip because we know that predators and parasites require pollen and nectar in order to control pests. This is the best result that we have had with the wild carrot because the wild carrot, as you know, in the middle of the road there's no water. This plant has very deep roots in addition to improving the soil structure and getting rid of problems of compaction and so on. They can survive until the end of the summer. So what we're interested in is having a sequence of flowers that are going to be growing constantly in the vineyard in order to breed this diversity and cut down on inputs, even if they're organic inputs. You can do this also at the landscape level, where, for example, many times what happens, the forest, just like in developing countries, the matrix is important. The forest provides protection against pests. There are many natural enemies that move but only 25, 30 meters. So how can you enhance the circulation? Well, you create a corridor that in addition to bringing these beneficials into the system, they beautify the vineyard, and the people that pay $30 a bottle there when they do ecotourism, they love to go and walk around here and see the flowers. And hi, honey, look at how beautiful this is. Let's go and buy the $50 bottle. Actually, Benziger, which has this island of flowers, gets 10,000 visitors, and they charge $10 per visitor if they want to do a tour and learn about the ecology of the system. How do they control the bugs, why these flowers attract which bugs, and all that. And they're very well informed because they hire researchers to do the research on this, so that they have some numbers. The last example is in industrial agriculture in the south. This is in Entre Rios, up north of Buenos Aires. This is the inheritance of years of transgenic soybean, a lot of erosion, total devastation, and there's a land grabber, but a good land grabber, an American guy that bought 3,000 hectares, and he restored the site to become this. So the idea is that he's preserving some corridors of natural vegetation. Here there's going to be strict intercropping systems here. This is going to be permanent pasture with fruit trees that are going to be growing here. So it's just the beginning of the design of the farm. So here would be a potential view of one of those strips, very diversified with rotations and so on. That would be producing all kinds of crops, food, and other things. And this is just another view of that particular farm. So agroecology definitely is a science for the design of biodiverse and resilient farming systems, no matter what the scale is. The problem with this type of properties is that they don't account for the problems of inequity and social injustice that we're concerned with. That's why agroecology has been much more attractive to the peasant movement than to the large-scale farmers. And that's where the work is. I think that's where the potential is. But I just wanted to bring this example to show you that from an ecological perspective, you can actually also design large-scale systems using agroecology. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Sure.
So Miguel will take about 10 minutes.
Questions, comments, disagreements? Yeah.
What is the name of the man who took on that project and the people who also did that ecological restoration on that mountain?
Ted Turner? No. He has land in Argentina. No, it's a guy called Doug Tompkins. He's a deep ecologist, rich deep ecologist, who bought 300,000 hectares of primary forest in Chile for conservation. And now he's moving into Argentina to do the same thing. But he's quite a character. I mean, definitely he's part of the land grabbers in Argentina. There are 6 million hectares of agricultural land in the hands of foreigners. But you know, if you ask me, I prefer that the land is in the hands of this guy than in the hands of the big corporate soil growers. Although that doesn't exempt this guy from many of the problems that we're talking about. And so his name is Doug Tompkins. He's well known. He used to be the owner of Esprit, the clothing company, and his wife was the owner of Patagonia. They got big money. But they're putting it into conservation, into agroecology, and things like that. And the other people with the island, that's Benziger, Benziger Vineyards in Sonoma County.
The mountain that was deforested and fertilizers.
That was a group called, it's an NGO called CIPAD, C-I-P-A-D, and it's in the Valle del Cauca, the Cauca Valley in Colombia. And they are doing incredible work with silvopastoral systems.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you're talking about biofuels and biofood, what is your perspective on the patents of all of that? Or who owns the patents or copyrights?
Well, the patents are owned by the corporations. I mean, the intellectual property rights of transgenic crops and all the innovations that are being developed, either biofuels, plants that are going to be engineered for biofuels are all patented material, intellectual property rights. The most dramatic thing of all this is that the University of California, which is a public university, although we only receive 19% of our budget now from the state, but it's still a public university, the companies have right of refusal, 30 days right of refusal for the information that can be published. So they can look at the information and they say, don't publish this, you cannot publish. So, you know, we lose a lot of things. I don't, because I'm not involved in this, but the people that are involved in this lose total independence, total freedom in terms of their academic freedom of being able to publish something. And on top of that, the arrangement at Berkeley is that there's going to be about 36 BP scientists in the campus in a new building that they're building right there on the campus that are going to have adjunct professor titles with the same rights that I have as a professor that I've been there for 30 years. 2 students, 2 lead classes, to guide undergraduate and graduate students who have postdocs. With the only difference that those guys each has 20 million bucks in their pocket and I have maybe 500. Maybe not, I don't have it. Anyway, so there's a lot of implications. And the penetration of the corporations in the university is very significant because we lose the public goods nature of our mission, but on top of that, they become very influential in the policies within the university because they have allies that are other professors, even these guys are adjunct, they might not probably have the right to vote in the academic senate, but their allies, the ones that they feed, those guys have power. And I have seen the erosion of our university in a dramatic way. I mean, Berkeley had a very important, it has an important legacy that's being lost by the implementation of this stuff. And obviously, when I leave, agriculture dies. Because they're not ever really in a position of it. It's all going to go to biofuels or who knows what. Not only biofuels, now, there's a very important report. If you think this is scary, go to ETC, like Charles. And there's a report by this group. This group used to call RAFI, Pat Mooney, those people. Now they call it ETC. They have a report called Biomasters, like biomass, but biomasters. And they talk about the alliances of corporations that are involved in nanotechnology and the new biology, synthetic biology, whatever they call it, and the kinds of innovations that are going to come out of this. But what's more worrisome is the alliances and the penetration of different universities. It's a very important document to read because we need to be aware of what's coming. What is going to be the alternatives to very powerful, very powerful.
A lot of your examples were pretty small-scale farmers, it seemed like, and I was wondering how you would see agroecological principles scaling up a little bit more to provide the types of food that are really needed, that also don't then have us all becoming peasant farmers. I mean, that sounds like a great life, actually. I think we should all do that, but maybe that's a little far off still. I guess I'm wondering, what do you see some issues with scaling it up? And then also, do you see a role for biofuels in that? Are there principles by which biofuels can work?
Well, the first thing, I thought I had explained this, but the first thing is that actually today, we're being fed by peasants, not by industrial agriculture. And the argument that we need to produce more food and we need to find ways to produce more food to solve the problem of hunger, where we have 1 billion people hungry today, doesn't have anything to do with production. I mean, in this country, if you look at the latest statistics, hunger is going up. And there's plenty of food to go around. Okay? So I think we need to, first of all, say that increasing production is a condition, but not a sufficient condition to solve the problem of hunger. There are many other issues, structural issues, justice issues, inequity issues that we need to address. Now, we don't need to become peasants, but what is being shown today is that small-scale farms are much more productive, and we need local food systems. Actually, there's a huge emphasis on local food systems for many reasons. To shorten the energy needs. You know, we cannot have this food, you know, where we're eating food that comes 5,000 miles away because of emissions, because of energy costs, because of ecological reasons. There are many, many reasons why we should enhance much more the local production. So local food systems is something that is in the agenda in many, many areas, not only in the third world, but in this country. There's a huge movement of food justice and local food systems. Now, scaling up could mean two things. For the Via Campesina, scaling up means more farmers practicing agriculture. More farmers are practicing agriculture. And those that don't have land, we're going to take the land so that they can become farmers. Like the MST. The MST is the land in Brazil that already controls 10 million hectares. They took 10 million hectares of land and then putting it to produce food. So that's one idea. Number of farmers spreading through the Campesino method, learn about the agroecology and just multiply the stuff all over the place. The other one is area, okay, large-scale farms, and I was trying to show some examples in which this is possible. As long as those farms are going to be producing food that is going to be accessible and that is going to be, affordable and all that for the local populations. Because the emphasis is on what we call food sovereignty. That is, first, satisfy the local, regional, national needs of food, and whatever you have extra, you can export. So they're not against export agriculture, but the emphasis first is to satisfy the local, regional, and national. And within that, in these settlements of the MST in Brazil, actually they grow biofuels because they have a second concept called energy sovereignty. But they produce only 10% of the land can be devoted to biofuel, and that biofuel is not to enter in the business, the global business, but to satisfy the energy needs of their tractors and their trucks and all that stuff. And actually they're doing it. They're going, but what's most interesting, I didn't show the pictures, in the northeast of Brazil, they're programs sponsored by the government actually, where this stuff like, for example, resinos comunes, castor bean, which is a very important source of oil for biodiesel, can be intercropped with corn, with cassava, in a very interesting way. In Cuba, they crop with food crops. So there's no contradiction. The only thing is that we're not producing for the corporate business. We're producing for our energy sovereignty. So and the third sovereignty is the technological sovereignty. That is that we are able to develop our own technology with agroecology, which is basically nature engineering nature, so that we can enjoy the ecological services that will enhance our production. So those are the three sovereignties that we talk about today: the energy, the food, and the technological sovereignty.
I know payment, there's a danger that payment for ecosystem services and rent plus and all these high-level negotiations could be absorbed by powers that dominate agriculture. Do you see examples of these financial mechanisms benefiting the types of changes that you're advocating at a small scale? Should we not discount those mechanisms because they could help bring about some changes in livelihoods and funds for value-added productions?
Well, I don't know of examples where farmers are benefiting from carbon markets. Although in Costa Rica, I think there are a few examples. But I think that we need to design farms to be biodiverse, productive, and resilient, and carbon sequestration and biodiversity conservation are consequences of that management. We're not designing to capture carbon, because carbon, if you do agroecologically, you're going to capture carbon. As a matter of fact, there is a professor at Berkeley, I want to say the name, that got $1 million grant from NSF, and the big experiment and the big discovery, the so what thing, was if we apply compost to a pasture, it's going to capture more carbon. We need $1 million to spend to discover what we already knew and we could predict. So the danger with ecological services markets, carbon markets of that nature, is that they can become so overwhelming, so powerful, that farmers then will immediately devote the land to the production of crops that are going to be capturing more. So for example, if you really want to capture, you just grow something fast growing like pines. And you don't need to grow anything, and you're going to get a lot of money out of this stuff. But what's going to be the future of that land, for your children, in the future? So I think I'm not against that. I'm just saying if the governments decide to compensate peasants for the ecological services, it should not only focus on carbon sequestration, it should focus on the fact that they conserve biodiversity, that they have conserved all these genetic varieties, all these things, the knowledge, etc. It's very interesting. In Brazil, there was a study in Sao Paulo State, and they found that if they studied the climate, the microclimate in a city, in a town, surrounded by sugarcane versus the 20 kilometers away, another city that was surrounded by small farms. This city was 10 degrees cooler than that one. That's an ecological service. I mean, would you like to live in this hot place? It's already 30 degrees in that state, now it's going to be 40. They've done studies back in Isao Fujimoto, a very important rural sociologist in Dayton. He found, when he did studies in California back in the, 70s, the towns that were surrounded by large-scale farms versus the towns that were surrounded by small farms suffered higher levels of violence, drug addiction, divorce, family breakups, all kinds of things compared to the small farm. The towns surrounded by small farms where the social networks were much more integrated, the solidarity was there and all that. So if you start thinking about the services of agriculture, they go beyond, carbon sequestration, beyond genetic conservation. There are many, many benefits that we get from this. And that, I think that we need to think much more broadly about how we can compensate the farmers for this service.
Thank you for coming.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mayor.
All right.